that instruction that we got from CARCD. And our
they need to go back fast. You need scopes. When you have the gas, it goes faster. Businesses nationwide are switching to Verizon Business Internet. It's a perfect fit.
Somebody who has their radio on isn't muted.
Not so small businesses.
There.
Whoops.
Just hit 2 o'clock and we already have 27 people. Pretty good. Are you all hearing the ding dings when people join? Okay. I turned that off for a while, but turned it back on because I was missing people. All right, it's slowing down at 40 participants. I think we should probably wait until about 2:03.
2:04.
Okay, 2:04. 2:04 and 30 seconds. Well, it's 2:02. We have 47 people. I think first of all, if you're not muted, can you please mute? Because I think I'm hearing an echo of my voice. There we go. All right, I think we can probably go ahead and get started. Thanks to so many of you for being here, and thanks so much to Brittany and Tess from Goldridge for agreeing to do this training for us today and for all that they do to promote Project Tracker. I we'll go ahead and let Brittany take over because she's put an agenda in the chat, and I see that I have a place to talk about why we want to do this in a bit. So I will wait for that. And as I let a couple more people in, I would say, Brittany and Tess, if you'd like to get started, that would be great. And if you've just joined, please be sure to mute yourselves so that we aren't distracted. Or I will mute you. I have
All right.
power.
Hi, everyone. There's so many. My name is Brittany Jensen. I'm the executive director of the Goldridge Resource Conservation District, which is in Sonoma County. And I've been here for almost 18 years, and I'm so excited. There's so many people I haven't met here yet, so that's always fun. I do have a little tiny agenda. I just put it in the chat to you, Nancy, but here's a chat for everyone else. So we're just going to go over really briefly, like why the project tracker today. And then Nancy will talk a little bit about the role of the project tracker in the Wildlife Conservation Board grant. And then Tess will go through a tutorial. Tess is our Grizzly Corps fellow and fellow RCD project tracker administrator, and then we'll have a little Q&A, and then we'll leave you with some to-do items. So just to make sure everyone knows why they're here today, the entering your projects that are funded under the CARCD Wildlife Conservation Board grant is a requirement of that grant. And so thank you for all of you who have got Tess's email and signed up for an account if you didn't already have one. While I'm talking, I'm actually going to ask, or I'm going to clarify. So I saw a lot of people on the invite list. Some were from RCDs and some were not from RCDs. So if you this meeting, is my understanding, Nancy, anyone can participate, but it's really for people who will be entering projects into the project tracker. So if you're part of the larger WCB CARCD grant, but won't be using the project tracker, you're welcome to listen. But everything that I'm going to be saying is kind of specifically for RCD staff or partner staff who are entering projects on behalf of RCDs.
I'm so glad you brought up that point, Brittany. I can't remember which partner it was, but one of our partners asked if they could use it to enter data associated with this grant. And I said, I thought that would be okay, but I wanted to know from you if you can see a problem with that, or should there be a way that it's affiliated with the RCD grant? So because it is the RCD project tracker. So what do you think we should do about that?
You can really only enter in projects associated with RCDs. So if it's a project that's not working with any RCD, then I don't think they actually can use it, just the way the project tracker is set up. So if there maybe isn't an RCD in that region or something, we can talk about a specific scenario.
Well, I think everything that partners are everything that partners are doing will be in assistance of RCDs. And so perhaps what we can do is discuss that offline on a case-by-case basis, because we just have 5 partners who aren't RCDs, and that way we can figure out if and how it makes sense. Would that be okay?
Yeah, we should talk about it separately, but essentially they would just need to, whatever they're doing, associate it with whatever RCD district they're working with. Right. And RCDs can grant partners to enter projects on their behalf, but they will still be associated with that RCD.
Okay.
Okay, so I will reiterate then, if you have not, we have Tess and Emily. Is Emily here? Emily, there you go. Emily is also an administrator of the project tracker and is a staff of CARCD.
Are you on this meeting today? Oh, maybe it should be. Sorry, I thought you it's the project tracker.
I think Hallie, you're not on mute.
It hasn't really started yet.
Yeah, it has started. Can you mute Hallie, Nancy? There we go. Okay, and so thank you for all of you who have signed up. If you haven't, please sign up now. And Tess and Emily will be hustling to get you approved. I'm going to share my screen briefly, just for those of you who don't know. We have right here, I already have, but you can, if I wasn't logged in, there'd be something right here that to get an account. So I can't actually show you what that looks like because I'm already logged in, but go to the help menu and get yourself an account while I'm talking. And so the RCD project tracker basically, sorry for those of you who have heard this before, but it came out of an idea from a bunch of RCD staff who are like, wouldn't it be great if we could show collectively the work that we do? And so a tool was created, co-funded by about 18 RCDs back in 2017. And it has really grown, and it's more powerful the more people use it. I'm going to go to the results page briefly just to show you. So currently, we have probably 24 really active participating RCDs entering projects into the project tracker. It's going kind of slow because my internet is slow, but we have hundreds of projects and tens of millions of dollars already accounted for in the project tracker. So you all who are new users, you can use it just for this WCB grant, but it's also free to use for all of your projects. So you can see there's already 389 projects from RCDs across the state, over $55 million with over 200 partners. I'm just going to show you for each RCD, they have their own page, which tracks both their funding and their accomplishments and all their projects. So you can see across the board, you know, some RCDs use it a little bit, some use it a lot. We have 65 projects in. We use it a lot to track and report on our achievements during the year and over decades. And so, yeah, it's free for everyone to use, and the WCB grant does have time in your grants for you to utilize this tool. It's basically just to enter in your projects for this particular project, but it doesn't take too long to enter in projects once you get used to it. So you'll have the opportunity to add in lots of other projects if you would like. I'm going to keep it really short because I really want to focus on the WCB grant. And so I want to just turn it back to Nancy really quick to just talk about, also Tess put some notes in the chat about how to sign up for an account if you haven't already. And Nancy will just talk a little bit about the role of the project tracker in the CARCD WCB grant. I just want to pause and check the chat. If you already have an account, do you need to make one? No, if you already have an account, just log into the account that you have. But each person will need to have their own account. Yeah. Okay, Nancy, go ahead.
Great. And I'm sorry if I'm repeating what I might have said in another meeting. But basically, there are a couple of things that I think are really key to know about Project Tracker. First of all, just in general, because there's so many of us working on this grant, or so many of you working on this grant, by all of you reporting your projects, we are going to, with one grant, just give a huge picture of the power that RCDs have to really make an impact on the environment. And I think that that's key, not only to this grant and to the value that we're bringing to WCB, which I'll talk about in a minute, but just in general, remember this, I hope that you won't think of this as a chore, but rather as a tool for you to use for your own fundraising, for your own outreach to potential landowners and partners, and to show off the great stuff that you're doing out there in a really easy and beautiful format that you can use for multiple reasons. And then with specific reference to WCB, I used the project tracker as one of our selling points, because as a funding agency giving us $20 million to play with, which is more than they've ever given to anybody before, I felt that they would value their ability to easily and with beautiful graphics and how, sorted in any way that wanted to be sorted, be able to refer people to this tool, which will show the impacts of their funding. So I know from my discussions with our grant managers at WCB that that was an important part of our grant. So I guess what I just want to reiterate is that there's going to be a learning curve, but it's not very hard. I mean, you're going to see in the training that using this tool is not the hard part. It's knowing the information that you want to put in, which comes as you develop your projects, which is stuff you're going to know anyway, or you wouldn't be able to do the projects. I every little bit of effort that it takes, I think, will pay off multiple ways, and that this is going to be a really positive thing for us, for CRCD, for RCDs in particular, for our funder WCB, and for future grants that we want to get from them and from other agencies. So I'm super, super excited about this opportunity to really get more people on board. 24 RCDs are already using it. That's fantastic. Look what it's going to look like. And you saw the impacts just those 24 have had. Just imagine what it will look like when this project is done and we've had all, 42 RCDs and all the different sites that you're working on and the things that you're doing recorded there. So that's my little spiel. Did I leave anything out, Brittany?
I don't think so. We might get into the specifics of timing, like when you need people to do things. One of the other topics is normally in the project tracker, in order to have some like quality assurance, quality control, there's two types of users. There's normal users and project stewards. So project stewards' role is to basically approve and any projects before they go to public view. So you'll see when we get into it, there's a place where you enter data into your project and then you would submit it. And whoever is the project steward for your RCD would then review it to make sure you didn't have any errors before it was published for public view. But for this particular project, Nancy would like to do that. So Nancy, when projects will be submitted, Nancy will be looking out of it for consistency purposes and will be kind of accepting or returning projects with comments for you to resubmit to her. So that is something that's a little bit different. So also just something to think about if you just signed up for the project tracker and you would like to use it for your RCD in general, you may need to assign a project steward as well. It can be the same person if you just have one staff. But yeah, and then the other thing I want to say is the source technology of the project tracker came out of something that was developed for the Tahoe region. And you can look into that later, but the only thing I want to share is that basically they took all of the governmental entities working to improve the Tahoe area and pulled together a version of this project tracker. And they went from getting like tens of millions of dollars to hundreds of millions of dollars for the Tahoe area because they were able to show their collective impact, but also their collective targets. And the collective targets is not somewhere where I think CRCD is ready to be at yet, but could be in the future. So just another way to reinstate what Nancy said of the potential impact of taking the time to enter in our achievements into a way that can be collectively seen. So last, I think that I'm going to pause and we're just going to jump in and start. Tess is going to start walking through how to enter in a project into the project tracker. I'm wondering, Nancy, would you like to record this portion of the meeting? You're on mute, Nancy.
It should be, it is recording already.
Oh.
Yeah, I started the recording.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
Okay.
Because I forgot at the last meeting I had. So I was hyper-conscious this time.
Okay, cool. One thing I'll show really quickly, just as Tess navigates to where she's going today, I just want to share. So my screen looks a little bit different because I'm an administrator, but once you have started entering your project, which maybe we'll have time for you guys to start doing it today alongside Tess, if you would like. Otherwise, you can just watch. But if you haven't submitted a project yet, it'll be here in this pending projects. And for your RCD, it will just be your pending projects. But this is for all of them because I'm an administrator. But so I have drafted a pretend project for our purposes today. So I'm just showing you how I'm going through pending projects and looking through And I've called this CARCD WC Climate and Wildlife Brits Farm. So one of the things that we're going to have is a naming convention. So that when you look for projects, they'll all be kind of grouped together. And so they will all have a similar title, but Tess will get more into that. So I'm going to pause here. I'm going to have our test project up. And Tess, let me know if you'd like me to share my screen while you're talking, or if you would like to take control, but I'll hand it over to Tess.
Yeah, I can share my screen and walk through it. Hi, everybody. My name is Tess. I am a Grizzly Corps Fellow with the Gold Ridge Resource Conservation District, and I am a project tracker administrator. I'm excited to be here with all of you and to kind of walk through this project entry. So let me share my screen while we start.
Tess, would you also like to share the Google Doc one more time of the written tutorial?
Yes, I was gonna ask if we were gonna do that before or after, but I'll just put that in the chat right now. All right. So here's a link to this project entry document that I created. Basically, it's kind of a walkthrough of how to enter a WCB specific project that would fall under this grant. And this is kind of the document that we used to craft our mock project that Brittany was showing. So let me just share my screen real quick. So when you first log on to the project tracker and you're logged in, as you can see right here, I'm logged in, you're going to see this option to add a project. And for our purposes, we're going to click enter an existing project. And then you will get redirected to this project entry. But I'm going to start with the project that we already created. So, and in this entry document, we have this really nice table of contents. So you can just click and it'll take you right to the section that you need to go to. So when we start with project basics, this one is the right one. We're going to start by selecting a primary resource area. And this could be different depending on the focus of your specific WCB project. So for our purposes, this project is going to be like a carbon farm plan on a farm. So we would select this carbon farm planning and implementation that's under climate change mitigation. But if you weren't working on a farm, or if you were doing like a pollinator or a monarch specific habitat enhancement project, you can go under wildlife habitat improvement and select that here, this invertebrate habitat restoration. And for the name, someone asked in the comments how we're gonna differentiate these projects with other projects. So on the project tracker, if you go to this projects and you pull up full project list, it might take me a second to load. You'll see all of the projects in the tracker are listed alphabetically. And for our purposes, we want all of these WCB block grant projects to be grouped together. So we are going to have all of them be named CARCD, WCB, Climate and Wildlife. And then you can differentiate it as your RCD chooses, whether you want that to be by like the landowner's name, if you have permission from the landowner, by location, like Laguna Street Farm, or you can even just say like project 1, project 2, whatever is easier for your RCD. And then we're going to do a project description that's just going to give you a little bit of information on the location, the goals of the project, the purpose of the project. And then you're going to be asked these questions. For our purposes, these projects for now are going to be in planning and design phase. The project tracker is really nice because you have the option to always be able to edit and update your projects. So as soon as your project moves from planning and design to implementation, you can just select that pretty easily. Same thing, once it moved from implementation to completion, you can select that. And while your project's in planning and design, that completion year is not going to be required, but if you select it as complete, that's going to be a required question. And then you're just going to select the years that the planning and design starts, the implementation, completion. For the completion, you can select like when the grant is ending, or like an estimation of when you think the project will be complete. Right. And then for simple location, you can basically just plot a point on the map, zoom in. This is more to kind of just get the general area. then the detailed location, this is more to get like specific like geospatial data on like the conservation practices on the specific property. And also, we're kind of gearing this tutorial specifically for like the WCB grant, but if you have any like project tracker in general questions, you can always reach out to me like about like things like the simple location and the detailed location and all of that. So for organizations, as you can
Can I
see on
just
this,
pause really quick, Tess? One thing to take in consideration with location is whether you have permission to have the property location visible. So there is a way that you can hide the location if you would like to know what it is, but you don't want the public to see it. There's also ways where you could just have it set at your office or in a watershed scale. So there's different ways to report the location, and it really depends on how important it is for that location to be specific, and if you have the permission of the landowner to publish it with the location. So just something to keep in mind. Go ahead, Tess.
for sure. Yeah, and you can hide that location option is right here. And even if we would recommend like actually selecting the location, and then if like the landowner doesn't give you permission, or they would prefer you to not publish their information, then you can select this hide and no one else can see that location.
Can I ask a quick question on the geospatial location that you showed? Is that do you just paste the drawing in there, or is there a tool that, oh, I see. It's
You can
upload
upload a GS file, or you can just draw it. So you can draw a line, you can draw a polygon. So you can really do whatever works best for you. So if you already have the GIS file of the project and you just want to upload it, and that's easy, or you can draw it or put a point. So there's lots of options depending on what you're reporting and why. For instance, we do have one thing we'll consider later is, do you do all your projects under this funding? If it's like multiple farms with multiple hedgerows or something, do you report it as one project or multiple projects? And there is a way where you can just have like one project entry in the tracker with lots of different parcels elsewhere. And so that's one way to kind of anonymize the project specific location while still reporting the total impact.
For sure. All right. And so for organizations, if you look on this entry guide, we have some explanations for how to request an organization. So for example, if there's a partner organization that you partner with frequently, but your RCD was just added to the system, so that partner organization might not be in our list of organizations, to request that as an organization, you can just select help and then request support. And then in the subject, need an organization or funding source added to the list. So that's an easy way to request your common partners and stakeholders. For this grant specifically though, Nancy helped us identify common partners and stakeholders relevant for this specific grant. So we're going to ask that everybody for all of their projects select CARCD and WCB as a partner. And then here's some other partners that you could potentially partner with, like if you're working on a carbon farm plan and you're working with the Carbon Cycle Institute, or if you're doing a straw planting and you're working with Point Blue, or you're doing monarch monitoring through Monarch Joint Ventures system. Those can all be relevant partners. Another thing I'd like to note is that if like on this partner list, if there were any that were listed by CRCD that for that particular project you did not partner with, you can always list them as stakeholders, because these would be people that you didn't necessarily work with, but they would have a vested interest in the project. And then you can add the state legislative districts that the project takes place in. I added a link so that you can just search that up really easily. And then this section is where you can add people that you partnered with that maybe aren't in the system or aren't frequent partners and don't need like their data, like the project data like collected for them, but you want to acknowledge that they're partners. You can just type those in right there. And then the
I'll just say one thing. One of the reasons for organizations that they have to be associated with the RCD is that the lead implementer, it has to be an RCD. So there's no way to track it otherwise. And each project also has to have a primary RCD. So you can see those little red lightning streaks are required project entries, and then things without the lightning streak you don't have to enter, and it will prompt you if you forget to enter something that's required. It'll let you know.
For sure.
Yeah, and then the other thing I just want to add is, I don't see it right here, but through each of these things there's a little like there's like a little, what is it called, magnifying glass. So there are ways to get definitions of different things while you're entering the project tracker for more information, but a lot of that Tess has put into the written tutorial.
Yeah, and for organizations, I'm not exactly sure why, but that information is just going to be here in small text, whereas for other pages, there'll be like a little eye icon that you can select for more information. And yeah, and also if you're partnering with an RCD, a different RCD to implement a project, you could have the lead RCD be the lead implementer, and then the other RCD be the primary RCD to account for that RCD partnership. And then for contacts, this is going to be the primary contact for the project, usually the project manager. This person, though, it is a drop-down selection. So this person does have to be a project tracker user, and they have to have an account. So if the project primary contact does not have a project tracker account, they will need to create one. Watersheds, this is pretty straightforward. Of just, you select the watershed that the project takes place in, and you can do that by just clicking on it like that, or you can search it up. All right, and then this is the part that we probably want to focus on the most. So when you are entering a project that is in the planning and design phase, you're only going to be asked to record the expected accomplishments because you haven't reached implementation yet. Once you update the project stage to implementation or completion, there'll be another section that you will be asked to fill out, which will be reported accomplishments. So for our purposes, we're just going to record what we are expecting to accomplish. And on this list, I've identified multiple different performance measures that can be selected. And I also noted that these are not the only performance measures that you can select. They're just some kind of common ones that will be used for this grant. You can also use this link to look at all of the performance measures that the project tracker tracks. But for our purposes, we're just going to look at a few, and I'll just go through a few examples. So if you're planning hedgerows, you can basically like go up here and select agricultural conservation practice. And for hedgerows, you can record that in either acres or feet. So I've selected that here. Then you select the correct option with the number, and these numbers refer to NRCS's conservation practice codes. And then under these subcategories, you would select the kind of land that it took place on, whether it's an orchard or a vineyard. For our purposes, we'll select cropland, and then how many acres you treated. And as you can see from this list, there's going to be multiple options for agricultural conservation practices that could be an option. And so if there's multiple agricultural conservation practices, just for this specific performance measure that you would like to select, you can just click this blue button, add a row, and it'll let you select another one. So if we're also doing silvopasture establishment, you can just select where it happened and how many acres. Or let's say we're doing conservation cover. Same thing, pretty straightforward. If you were going to also select a conservation practice, but you wanted to record it in feet, that would be a separate measure. So you would have to search that up separately, and then it'll pop out here at the bottom. And let's say you're establishing a windbreak or a windrow. Same concept, linear feet, let's say 400. Here's some other like greenhouse gas reduction. You can record that annually or cumulatively.
And we actually want to ask if it does have cumulative impacts to do both always.
Yes, for sure. And there's also, like Brittany mentioned, some performance measures that are going to go hand in hand with each other. So for example, if we are doing like this ag conservation practice and we're going to select compost application, we would also ask that you also acknowledge the soil water holding capacity. So that one you would do water conserved, increased soil water holding capacity, site type, agricultural, and then however many acre feet, I should say 40.
I have a question on that, Tess. I think I remember that with when you go to look at the NRCS practices, they do bring up the benefits. Is that correct? So if someone weren't sure of what the, like if they didn't know, oh, I have to remember that one of the benefits of compost is water retention. Is there an easy way for them to get triggered to know what
I think for some of the practices, we do have in the notes common co-benefits, but how about after this, I'll double check and make sure that they're all there. The other thing, Tess, I'm sorry if I missed it. I was accepting a bunch of people, but I want to could you just show people briefly where they could find the list of all the performance measures?
Yeah,
so they can see them all at once.
So that is going to be, I added the link to that on top of here, but the way to find it on the project tracker is if you go to program info and then the performance measure list, it's going to be this last option under program info. And that's just going to tell you. So like if before your project entry process, you want to just look to make sure, you know which ones you want to select. Here's a list of everything.
I also use the like control F function. So I'm like, oh, I'm doing a planting. I want to make sure like I got all my things possible. So I might just like control F plant or something. Or say you're doing compost, that you might think, oh, wait, we also measure soil water holding capacity when we increases when we do. So you can actually search through this so that you know how to find it once you're in the drop down menu. Because when you're in the drop down menu, you can't see all the options until you're already in there. So it's helpful to kind of refer back and forth to make sure you can find all the performance measures you need. And I just want to note that we do know we have a lot of performance measures, but that's because we have so many RCDs across the state with so many different kinds of projects. So we acknowledge that it's a little annoying, and also it's just the way it is right now.
For sure. And also kind of to Nancy's question, I did add, where is it? Yeah, for like conservation cover versus cover crops, like, I did add a little definition for like the difference between these two. But if you Google the term with the number, the NRCS like definition and co-benefits and all of that will pop up if you kind of need a refresher or need to be like, oh, well, does this count as a conservation cover or is this more of like a cover crop? So you can always look that up. And I've found that looking it up with the number puts you right to NRCS. Okay, and then another, where is it? Oh, we haven't added it. Okay, let me add that one. Oh no, it's right here. It's the first one. So another performance measure that we do want to track is if these projects are taking place within underserved communities. And so that's really easy to kind of account for. You just need to select one if that project does take place in an underserved community, as that is part of like our reporting requirements. Another metric that could be helpful is this people participating in activity. So as I said, they'll hop to the bottom. So you can choose, who's participating in this activity. Let's say we were doing landowner technical assistance. So you could select landowner, technical assistance, and let's say we were helping 12 landowners. You could also let's say you were doing like a straw planting for hedgerows. You can do youth, do like a school program, and 45 students participated. Those are some important metrics that we want to account for. And like we said, if it's going to be very specific to your specific project. So There's going to be some that aren't included in this list that we've identified. And you can always use this list to find other ones that you're interested in adding. Okay, let's move on to financial.
Can I just mention
Yeah.
something briefly that maybe you already did? So there's two things. There's expected outcomes and then reported performance measures. So in the planning stage, you just have like what you hope to accomplish. And some of you may have what that is right now, or maybe some of you are still developing what those projects are. And so you can add to this and change your expected performance measures as you know what your projects are. And then once you start implementing it and you change the project category, you'll have to start reporting yearly on what you have achieved towards those expected performance measures. And I just see, I'm trying to answer questions in the chat, but I do see Carminder has her hand up.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yeah.
So on this last page, right where you're looking right now, where it says the value 1 for each unit of underserved communities for the number of projects. If she put the 1 in, or if you put the 1 in, Tess, does that mean, because you had below 12 landowners that were assisted plus school groups? So does that number 1, how does that connect to, you know, like if I have 12 landowners, maybe 3 of them are underserved communities and 9 are not. And so what does that number 1 mean? How does that tie? Does that make sense?
For sure.
Yeah, sorry. Go ahead.
Oh,
Tess.
no, you can go ahead, Brittany.
Oh, I would say that the communities would be like the way that WCB has asked us to track projects is how many underserved communities are you serving? So underserved communities is different than underserved individuals. So this first one is the communities question, like how many communities are you serving? Which it's not super clear how to answer that question. I think that's like a big, you know, you could use lots of different ways to categorize it. So I think the advice is to do the best that you can, and you feel free to talk to other RCDs about how they're doing that. I know for our you know, there's obvious like the DACs, like the disadvantaged community maps, but then we also maybe consider like schools that have like certain amounts of free or reduced lunch programs, or you might have your own, like our own county has identified underserved areas that are not in alignment with the statewide DAC maps. So there may be other ways that you identify underserved communities, but then in the people participating, you could then say like, you know, this number of people in underserved communities. So that might be a workshop or direct technical assistance. And so there's just 2 different ways to track things so that we can speak to the kind of numerical targets or tracking that WCB wants in these communities, but then you can also track individuals. Does that enough of an answer for now, Carmen?
Kind of, yeah. Thank
Okay.
you.
Yeah.
I have something to add to that too. And that's that if we have a chance, if we figure it out, we might be able to do something to add a couple more things into Project Tracker. We've talked about it, but we haven't concluded what we should do yet. But also in your narrative reports that come with your invoices, there's a place where I believe that I asked you to describe how you might be serving people in underserved communities. So there will be a couple different ways for us to provide that information. And we're also hoping to have a larger discussion on this whole way to tackle all the myriad ways you can describe underserved communities, and how can we find a way that really says what we're doing and really truly reports our impacts. And we're not quite there yet, but we do have many years on this grant to figure that out. And there was a question that I'm not sure I answered correctly. It was from RCD Santa Monica Mountains, and he's saying my project doesn't take place in underserved community, but is reaching out and involving underserved communities. Does that count? And I said yes. And I think you could do it in the constituent served. Is that the right? Would it be?
So yeah, in constituent type, there is underserved.
Okay. So that would be the place.
Yeah.
Good.
There was
And then-
another question. Go ahead, Nancy. There was another question in the chat about monarch habitat, and that is under special status insect species habitat. So under there's a specific focal species, and it does it by acres, but we would like feedback if you need another metric to report besides number of acres of habitat. I know some people are doing monitoring of numbers of monarchs, so that's something that we could additionally add, but I know it's also something that RCDs in general are responsible for tracking. So we've been doing it on an acre-wide basis. So let us know if that doesn't meet your needs, and we can talk about adding or changing performance measures.
Yeah, I'm sorry, Brittany, that was my question. This is Melinda from Mariposa. I see it here on the screen, but on the performance measures, like if you search for monarch.
Yeah, I just realized that we haven't updated the list since adding it. So I have that in a note to do. So on our whole list, it's missing, I realized.
Well,
Thank you for bringing it up.
That answers my question. Thank you.
Okay, yeah, it's in there. We need to update. They're not linked. I just realized. So we need to go through and type that up. Tess will take a note of that. And then Sarah, do you have a question?
Yeah, well, so this is probably a question for a different time, but in terms of like metrics for disadvantaged communities, I know there's like the free and reduced meal or lunches, but we just recently came across a couple different cities or communities that were no longer eligible. They no longer met that metric of like 50% free or reduced meal criteria, because too few kids are going to school actually at this point. So they're no longer considered disadvantaged by that metric because the kids just aren't going to school to get free lunches. So maybe table that for a different, somehow find a way to capture that in a different metric.
Yeah, I think this is a bigger discussion that we were going to have at the CRCD conference, but I think it actually needs to be open to all RCDs, but it's really, what are the different ways that we can show that we're serving underserved communities? And I think each RCD right now probably has their own way of doing it, or no way, which I think we should have a conversation about, because each county is so different in each individual circumstances and what you would categorize as underserved. So you're just going to have to use best judgment, I think, right now is and maybe there are spaces to type up explanations. So further on in the project tracker, there's like a notes section that's just for your RCD and not open to the public. And so maybe that's a section where you type in for your own historical prosperity. Like we chose, that we were serving one underserved community, which is this community because of this reason. It's not required, but if you wanted to keep track somewhere, that would be a place where you could do it.
Yeah. And this is something that that we were going to put in the conference, and then we just couldn't do it. But I think actually that might be better. So this is my request for nags from anyone out there, in case I forget, that this is a very important thing that CRCD wants to convene, so that we can really just look at all the different ways we can describe the people who we serve, who we know are underserved. And eventually, hopefully, communicate with funders the difficulty of the current terminology and conflicting terminology, and sometimes how that doesn't really tell the real story. So it's important.
Yeah, I have one more question in the chat that I think that was just sent to me, but Nancy, will you tell folks who are itching when they would need to enter in their project for the first time?
I think that I provided a date, but it has to be done once a year. I need to figure out where I feel like I've said that, but I can't remember.
Okay. Well, anyways, it's not required right away, right? Right
Yeah.
now, we're just giving you a training on how to use it. I think it would be good right after this training, shortly after, to start entering in, even if it's just an imaginary project, or if you do know what it is, in there in case you have questions that come up before the reporting time is required to be finished. We will send a reminder to everybody when the reporting is required, with enough time for you to enter it in and ask questions if you need to. But as you can, go ahead.
Sorry, I was just looking at it today. It's in the subcontract for the implementation grant.
Thank you. Is it
the
like
first date is June 30th of this year?
Okay.
Okay, Tess, we'll add that to our notes. I'll put it up.
And I think that was meant to just say that, like, it was just a starting point, like if you're in a planning phase. Does it say you're required by June 30th?
Yes, it says, at a minimum, enter initial basic project data by June 30th of this year and update at least annually between January 1st and January 10th of each following year.
Thank you for telling me what I wrote.
All right. Brittany, are you putting that into the document?
I'm making a note. Yeah.
Okay, awesome. So from there, I guess I'll just move on to the budget. And again, if you have any kind of questions that come up about adding a performance measure or needing to add one, you can always have a help request or just reach out to me directly by email or reach out to Brittany. Oh my God, save. You can just save and continue.
Could I ask one more quick question about how you enter the constituents served?
Yeah, for sure.
So what if you had, so I saw that underserved communities is a drop-down category in that menu, and then youth and other, like, what if you're working with a school that is part of an underserved community? If you report youth on one line and then underserved community on another line and report the number of individuals, wouldn't that be like double counting?
Yes, I would say in that case, pick youth and then this second underserved communities so that you can capture both of those without like double counting the amount of people.
Got it. Thanks. Thank you.
Yeah, for sure. And we'll also kind of go into kind of entering like projects together versus entering each project individually. This kind of like landowner workshops, like if you're working on a singular project on a singular farm, you're not going to be like working with 12 landowners most likely. But we can kind of discuss that later of kind of the pros and cons between entering projects individually versus entering them all together. So for the budget, on this document, we've already identified the funding source that refers to this specific grant. We named it the CARCD Climate Habitat Block Grant. So we have that right here, but and once you already have something selected, like you can't search it up, like it's not going to pop up a second time. So let me just show you. You can just type it in, the Habitat Block Grant. And the organization that's in parentheses is the funder. So like for this, like healthy soils, like you can see like CDFA is the funder. So once you select that specific grant, let's say the secured funding in your grant agreement is about $50,000. The targeted funding is funding that you are hoping to get but have not secured yet. For this grant, that would be 0 because we've all signed the grant agreements. But there could potentially be other funding sources for projects specifically. That's why we have these different examples in here. Like you could use EQIP for some match funding or CDFA's Healthy Soils Initiative. And again, let's say you're applying for that, but you haven't gotten approved or you haven't signed the grant agreement yet, you would delineate that as targeted funding. There's also an option here to account for landowner cost share, how much money the landowner is putting into the project themselves. And yeah, and same thing with organizations. If there's a funding source that you need that isn't in the system, you can always select help, request support, need a funding or need an organization or funding source. Oh, and I forgot, the first step before you enter any of that is you will be asked to input that the budget is the same each year or that the budget varies by year or it's a 1-year project. For our project, the budget is going to vary by year. So that's what we're going to select.
I'm going to pause really quick. Go ahead, Tess, finish.
I was just going to say that the bottom is going to give you kind of the total, how much secured funding you have, how much targeted funding you have, or funding that has no source identified. And then I'll kind of give you a total budget for your project at the bottom.
And before I go to Cody, I'll just say the important thing about both tracking targeted funding and no funding source identified yet is when people ask a question like, well, how much money would you need to do all this work? Then you can just go and look here and you can tell them. And then also if it moves from, you know, if you applied for the grant, so it's targeted, but then you received it, then you can just move categories and it's already in there. Question from Cody.
Hello. Yeah, we will be supporting some of this with the CDFA pollinator habitat grant. So I didn't know if that one was already in there, but just
It doesn't look like it is, but if you put in a help request, I can create that really quickly.
cool. Thank
Yeah.
you.
The reason we require admins to add performance measures and funding sources is to make sure we don't have two of the same things by a different name. So we're just doing a little quality control to make sure we don't have like 319H or then like, some other version of 319H. So it's just a way to make sure that we don't accidentally start tracking the same thing two different places.
Yeah, for sure. And also in the same way that once your project moves into implementation and completion, that you will be asked to report your expected accomplishments and then your reported accomplishments. You are asked to record your budget and then your reported expenditures. And reported expenditures are going to be reported by year. So for our purposes, we're most likely going to say there's no expenditures to enter, and you can add haven't started implementation yet. If some of this money is going into specifically the planning or design phase, you can account for that by putting it here and how much exact money that you used. But if all of the money is going towards implementation, you can account for that in this notes section. Right.
So would I see, oh, never mind. Never mind. Forget it.
Okay. Right. And then the last.
The one thing I'll just say about the reported financials, sorry, I'm pausing, but is that it's by calendar year instead of by fiscal year. So that part is a little confusing. And I would just say, just do your best. There is just make sure that you're not double reporting. So what we usually do is we'll go in at the end of the calendar year and we'll just kind of follow things based on our invoicing. And I believe this is quarterly invoicing. So hopefully those quarters line up with the calendar year as well. Yeah. So then you would just report it that way. And it's okay. Like sometimes what we'll actually do is we'll wait till the end and just report it all in one year, even if it happened in multiple years. And I think technically that's fine. There's no issue with that as long as you're not double counting.
I'm kind of thinking that might be fine for this. I don't think, there's enough tracking going on. I don't think that many people who are interested in our impacts care about the rate at which we're spending money. So unless it's beneficial to you, I will just say I'm okay with it being done near the end or at the end, but it should be done at the end. Especially since Brittany said that's how they do it sometimes. That makes me more comfortable.
Yeah, we do it by calendar year too,
Okay.
because sometimes it is nice to track. Like if you did want to, for our owners to do like, how much money did we spend this year? Like it's an easy way to see how much money you spent on certain projects. So if it's easy for you to do that, I think it's nice. You don't have to go back, but it's not necessary. The other thing I was going to say was, I just wanted to mention that like, this seems like a long training, but the actual time we're taking going through is about all the time it takes to enter the project, as long as you have the project details in front of you. And so I don't want anyone to feel intimidated by how long it takes. Right now, we really just want to go through like, what would it look like us entering in the project so that you could see the whole process.
Yeah, for sure. And the more that you enter projects, the easier and quicker it gets. I would say like the first project I entered maybe took me like 45 minutes to an hour, but now I can do it in like 15 minutes, 20 minutes, as long as I have all the information that I need. Okay, cool. So the last,
sorry, there's a question in the chat that I think I would like to address, and I would like to get your advice on too. Is the budget section also a requirement of the WCB grant, or just a feature project tracker that's being explained? Do subcontractor invoices provided to Nancy suffice? So I think the value of putting the money in at some point is that you then show the value, you show how the value of the work that you've done in dollar terms, which shows how a tiny bit of money to an RCD is leveraged into something massive. So that is the reporting benefit of it. I will not be able to take the invoices that I get from you and enter that information into Project Tracker myself. So WCB didn't know enough about Project Tracker to require this, so it's not a requirement. So I will need to follow up this up with writing, but if it feels like it's going to be a lot of work during your project to update the budget section, at least in terms of expenditures, I would say just do it at the end as part of your final reporting activity, because that would all be coming together anyway in your final report. And then with regard to what the budget for the project is, I think that should be entered, because the actual budget should be entered, because that is an upfront picture of the value. I think the expenditures to me are not something that needed to be tracked until the end. And I just would love to have Goldridge's comments on that to make sure that makes sense. And if I'm doing anything that doesn't make sense.
Yeah, I'm just going to show you really quick. Tess, if I could just share my screen for a moment. So there's not as many projects entered in currently for the Wildlife Conservation Board, but if you can see, so each, you can go to organizations. And so I already went to WCB, and as you can see here, it tracks expenditures. It basically shows how much money RCDs have spent of WCB. So it won't track budget, it tracks expenditures. So I think it is important for that information to be in there. I don't think it's important to do annually. I also don't think it's super hard to do annually, because you will have your quarterly invoices. I would suggest just doing it one time a year and not trying to update it every quarter. But you can see, like, you'll be able to track by different type of funding source how much was spent in each year, which all the data in here can be downloaded into Excel, and I think that it's really, important. And then it then can tie in expenditures to accomplishments too.
Okay.
So I do think it's important. I don't think it's important to do all the time, but I think at least once.
Okay. Yeah, and now as I'm thinking about it, again, this could be part of we have to do our annual reports too, our annual progress reports. So this might be part of that activity. I will need to think on that, but now that that's been explained, and it can just be tied to your invoices. The data is already there. It's not like you have to find new data. That might be something that once a year I'm kind of moving back away from my super lax idea about it, maybe wanting to get it to once a year. But I'll have to confirm that.
I'll show one more thing too, just so for each funding source, it will have its own page too. So say you go into Prop 1, any project that was funded by Prop 1 will be listed here, and the expenditures will be here. And I think a new feature that will be coming up is that it will also have the it's not here yet, but the accomplishments for each specific project source. You can get it a different way, but it's not graphed here. So I think yeah, putting it in is important, because we'll be basically, if you look, we'll be tracking I typed it in the wrong spot. Well, anyways, we'll be tracking it by the funding source right here. And so right now it'll be empty, but it'll have a chart here showing for the specific grant and a list of all the projects, and then eventually a list, like a graphic version of the accomplishments as well.
Yeah, that actually really will be great for our annual reporting. So they want to do this again for us next time.
Right. So the last few sections are this project themes. And when I pull it up here, so basically the project theme section is basically just a way to group projects together that have similar themes. So the project tracker actually lets you look up project by project theme. So if you go to project info and select project themes, you'll see that there's 233 projects that involve healthy watersheds in some way or another, 122 that involve endangered species, 181 involve climate change. So these are kind of things that, kind of like when I said before, how you can only select one primary resource area. This is kind of a way for you to acknowledge the different areas that your project is targeting. So for example, we've kind of identified these 3 themes that could be used for these WCB specific projects. So climate change, endangered species, and local farms. And we've kind of written just these kind of broad explanations. We would recommend that you kind of make it more specific for your specific project. You can copy and paste these and then kind of add to it or change as it is applicable to your specific project. And like, for example, like if you are doing like a carbon farm plan and it doesn't have to do with endangered species, then you wouldn't select that one. Or opposite, if you are supplying like monarch or pollinator habitat or enhancing it, but it's not on a farm, or it's not a part of a carbon farm plan, then you wouldn't select that one.
And you can select as many as you want. So these are some suggestions of top ones, but you can do education, healthy watersheds, forest and fire, if that relates to you.
Yeah,
You're
for
not
sure.
limited.
Yeah, like if it was a straw planting, education would be a perfect category to select, or like land preservation could be another one. Then this last section, additional data, is just kind of where you can add photos. We recommend adding as many photos as you can. Attachments and notes. This is the note section that Brittany was talking about earlier. You can add specific notes about the project, things that you kind of wanted to make a note of earlier but didn't have a space to. You could add like maps of the project area. Anything like that could be relevant here. And then external links, maybe if, you know, it's a huge project that has its own website, or if you want to add your partner's websites or something like that. But yeah, that is pretty much everything that you need to enter a project. And then here I've added a little section about once you submit your project, how we're going to go through the project approval phase, and that will be Nancy that will be doing that. Nancy is going to act as the project steward for all of these projects. So she'll get a notification when you've submitted your WCB specific project, and she'll go through it and either approve the project. And once Nancy approves the project, that means it'll get published so that anybody can see it on the project tracker, or she can have the option to return it, which means maybe there was an issue with the budget, or she wanted you to select another performance manager, just something like that. She can return it, and then once you fix it, you can return it back to her, and then she can publish it. But yeah.
I just want to show one last thing, and then we'll get into any more Q&A, which is, so one of the benefits of the project tracker that we use is that once you've entered all your data and it's approved, it automatically creates a 2-page fact sheet with photos and financial information and performance measures. And so that is great. And then the other way that we use this is that we, like on our website, we just link people to our individual projects instead of having to type it all out. And that way our website stays more updated. So I think that's at the end of our tutorial section. And if you are fully satisfied, I think you can go. But if you would like to stay for Q&A, that's great. And before anyone leaves, my recommendation would be in the next week to try and enter part of your project. And while it's still fresh in your mind, even if it's kind of make believe. And then the second thing would be to identify if you need a project steward outside of Nancy from CARCD, then see whether it's yourself or someone else who would be the person who would approve any other projects you'd enter.
I also put a shortcut to the tutorial into the shared drive under resources. I'm thinking I might actually create a folder that says project tracker, but I haven't done it yet. So you've been given the link, but we'll have multiple ways to get to the tutorial. And then I think you already know that Tess has office hours for project tracker and has been supporting people all along and really wants to do that because she's good at it. And she pushes out a lot. So we have really great resources.
Yeah, and Tess, will you put your Calendly link in the chat too?
Yeah.
So the
for
question
sure.
was, can it be changed? Can projects be changed once they're entered? And so you will have and biannual reminders to update projects. So projects are constantly updated and edited and changed, either just the photos or the budgets or the performance measures, or someone drops out of a project. So it's always editable by you at any time. All right, any more questions? Emily.
Thank you. So is this project tracker just for more on the ground implementation work, or is it for any work that's included under this funding source, including things like education and outreach? Like we have part of the funding is for our regional working groups on monarch conservation. Like, is that part, does that go in here, or is it just the on the ground stuff?
Well, my instincts are, I don't know what Nancy will want to report on, but for projects like big projects where we have like technical working groups and stuff like that, we don't track every small single thing in the projects. Really, the idea is to track what are the outcomes of this project. So not all the planning work that, like, maybe a plan is part of the so maybe your technical work group comes up with a plan or something, and that may be a deliverable, but it's really tracking what is the impact on the ground. So your impact may be the number of people you've engaged with, or acres, or whatever it is, but but you can type up the process. Like there's a few areas where you can describe process, or you can link to other things, if you have more information somewhere else through those external links. But my gut is like just to kind of report on the high level, what are the actual outcomes from the work that you've done.
Okay, thank you.
Brittany, you didn't show that that if they're deliverables, like if you're doing a demonstration project or a workshop and those are deliverables within the grant, that those are performance measures in the system.
Yes.
So it's not just implementation, it's whatever your deliverables are in your grant agreements.
Right, but I think what I heard Emily say was like that they have a technical work group, that they're working with a technical work group, for instance. And I don't know if you would report the fact that you are working with a technical work group as a performance measure per se. Do you have input on that, Patricia?
I don't know. I think that's up to Nancy, like how,
yeah. I don't think that is a current performance measure, and I don't know who would be like tracking that performance measure, but yeah.
I think I like it as you're definitely going to be having impact, Emily, through this. It feels to me like it might be make the most sense to report it as the people that what Brittany said under the people reached. What was the term that you used? I'm so sorry.
It's like people participated. I don't have them all memorized, but
yeah. And I think in notes, then you could say, is there a way to note that this was a working group somewhere? I think.
Yeah, let me look into that. That is a new question for me, and so I will have to get back on that specific.
That might actually be. I mean, it's part of community outreach that's really important, but these working groups get stuff done, and they are, they're different than, because it's, you know what I mean? So it might be something that we want to consider. What do you think? Emily, what would your preference be? How do you want to communicate?
Well, I'm not sure. I guess another way of maybe phrasing the question is, at the end of the day, do we want to see our whole budget accounted for within Project Tracker and have all of our expected accomplishments and deliverables be noted, or is it more like acres, feet, the more measurable kind of on the ground things? So if it's just that, then we can just put our implementation budget in and have, we could put multiple projects with, like, here's the work we're doing on hedgerows and here's the work we're doing on pollinator gardens and public parks, and have those be separate. Or we could kind of like create one giant project with lots of different things. And I'm not sure what looks better from the Project Tracker framework. If you're going to be using this for communication, and if we're going to be using this for communication, I just haven't used this tool yet. So maybe so I'm looking for some guidance on like the best way to organize our projects within Project Tracker.
Yeah, I think that's the recommendation why we suggest doing one like all of like just one project tracker entry for all your project tracker, because we come across this too. It's hard because, for instance, like some of this might be matching for other grants that you have or something. But I think we'll try and put it all in as one project so that we can capture like the time we spent on monitoring, reporting, and project management. And so it's all in one cost. So you're not having to break out individual implementation. I think you can do it that way, but then you do tend to be like, well, where do we allocate this thing that's part of all these different projects?
Yeah.
And so that is one of the reasons I would kind of recommend doing one project versus multiple.
Yeah, and also just if you envision that fact sheet, that if the fact sheet is meant to show all the things you did under the WCB grant, then you would want it in that one space, right? So you'd get the one fact sheet. So
That sounds good. That sounds easier.
yeah,
Yeah. It won't have the more specific, like, oh, look, here's all the different areas that are covered and things. But that seems good to me.
yeah. I mean, I think when you're doing implementation, you want to show where it is, you know, to the level that you're allowed by the landowners. But then those more intangible things can be included in there too, in narrative and in the people served. And I think that it seems like it's so that you know, it's been thought of by RCDs who know all the stuff that's done. So I think it does account for everything. But we're meaning to make it not complicated and not onerous for RCDs. So I think Brittany's suggestions make a lot of sense.
So first I'm going to do Ruby's question and then we'll go Cody and Sarah. So Ruby asked if there was a way to produce a countywide map of projects, and is there a way to export that to use in publications or the website? So the answer is yes. I didn't get into it today just because I wanted to focus on this project, but I would recommend checking in with Tess. There's actually a way where you can embed the map from the project tracker of just your RCD into your own website that will then have little dots where all your projects are, that's constantly talking to the tracker, where then when people click on it, it will take them to the project tracker, but on your website, it can show where all your projects are. And we have a tutorial on that Tess put in the chat. Cody.
Hi, yeah, I think I caught the tail end of you maybe answering my question, but regarding entering projects individually versus one whole project. Yeah, just like an overview, we're using this to expand our working land program. So the nature of it is to have multiple site locations. So is that possible to add like?
Yeah, I can find,
parcels?
I can find an example of one of ours really quick and I'll put it in the chat. But yes, it is. So there's pros and cons of doing, I'm just going to pull it up. There's pros and cons of doing individual versus lumped projects. So it kind of depends on what you want to report, but I'm going to just share my screen really quick. So we do a program, it's like a rebate for grazing for vegetation management. And it's, you know, the parcels are small compared to this is a big county, but you can see there's multiple parcels. And then when we get into performance measures, you know, we track the performance measures grouped, but we can talk about properties, like working with 4 or 8 or 10 properties or whatever. And then it also allows us to, in our financials, just to combine all of our funding and talk about it instead of having to track it by each individual project. For carbon farm plans or something, for example, I don't know if this is where you're getting at, you may want to track them separately, because you may want to track how you're meeting the implementation of those practices over time. And that would be really hard to do as a group. It wouldn't be hard to do as a group, but it would be a lot to keep track of, you know, like who is entered into each year for what performance measure, because what the reported performance measures are annual. So you can see by which year, which practices, like how many units were done for each one. So I don't know if that fully answers your question, but again, I think my recommendation for now would be to group them. But if you would like to have a more specific conversation about it, maybe reach out to Tess and we'll schedule something with you.
Okay, thank you.
Sarah?
Yes, okay. So one of our deliverables is to work with, I think it was 32 landowners to kind of brainstorm things that they could do on their property to benefit pollinators. And would there be a way to like put in potential projects that we don't have funding for, we don't have any immediate plans to implement, but just kind of as a placeholder, like to show like we came up with this site plan and this conservation plan, but you know, if funding comes along, we might be able to implement it someday, but just a way to track those types of projects, I guess.
Yes. So I would say to a certain degree, you can. I'm going to pull up an example where basically you can put in, I'm just going to use a carbon farmland because that's what comes to mind for me. So we can say like in our performance measures, this is our expected outcomes. So these are basically like ag conservation practices that we have identified that we would like to achieve through this plan. And then we can report on them as we do them or not. And you can associate costs with those too. So this would be a way to track like, you know, it would cost whatever, $10,000 an acre to do a hedgerow or something. And then you could actually track over time if you wanted to get it funded or something, you could send someone to that page and it could show what the cost would be to implement it.
I guess I kind of meant more like on the mapping side of things to be able to show. I mean, I guess you could still.
It's not a conservation planning tool, so you couldn't like make a map. You could include the map that you had in here, but it's not meant to be a planning tool. You can track what you had, you know, the outcomes of the conversation with that landowner, what they would like to achieve over time. But it's not meant to have like each practice it's not a geospatial database, I guess, in a robust way. And so maybe we'd have to have a longer conversation about that. And one thing I'll say is I think Upper Salinas Las Tablas RCD developed something called their Sustainable Lands Initiative, which I think is for this, which is basically where landowners and or RCD staff can identify practices that are tracked in a way, in a more specific way. I'm not super familiar, but I think if you go to their website, they do have a recorded presentation on how that works. But this is mostly just for reporting, not for project planning, this tool.
I can tell you 100% that if at some point the RCD project tracker had that capacity, because we were always going out to sites, you know, with landowners, public parks, whatever, open spaces, and like, oh, this would be a really cool place for such and such project. And but we, you know, don't always remember or don't always communicate that with each other. But so if you know, we've been tracking it in our own ArcGIS, you know, database, I guess, sort of ArcGIS Online, but having the capacity to do that and share that amongst like CARCD so that if funding opportunities come up in the future, that could be a beautiful thing.
Yeah, I think I can do part of it, but not all of it. So I think it would just be a more nuanced conversation. Yeah.
Yeah, I do think what Devin has put together could fit the bill though. And he just presented it recently, and I need to, if there's a recording, I think it's worth it. I need to ask him to share that.
Okay.
Could be really helpful because that's really is what it's for.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'm going to put a link, Sarah, to one of our projects in there where you can kind of see we actually like included the plan in there and all the practices and tracking it over time. So you can take a look at that and see kind of where it meets what you're looking for and where it doesn't, and then we can have a rich conversation at some point.
Okay,
so I think that is a common need. Yeah. Okay. Patricia said if a farmer wants to show off their plan and efforts towards meeting greenhouse gas goals for a supply chain, for example, they could also link to the project tracker site through their marketing efforts. Yeah. Okay, any other questions? We have 8 minutes left.
And I also just want to say someone asked me if I could send some of the links that we've been sharing in the chat in an email after, so I will send everybody some of the links that we've been sharing with everybody.
Great. And I'm going to put the whole chat up, or either share the whole chat, or I'll just share it when I share the recording.
Perfect.
Okay, and maybe also in the email, Tess will send out, now that you are subscribed to, or now that you're users, you will get emails from Tess about updates for the project tracker. So you will get updates about office hours. So office hours is just like open time where Tess has made herself available. You can drop in and ask questions. Sometimes there's, she's in the middle of something, so you don't always get her undivided attention. But if you need her undivided attention, then she also included a link in here to schedule a 30-minute meeting with her. Patricia, go ahead.
Also, Tess, I think you could, if there are emails about Project Tracker that you want to get to the whole community, we have that Google group, so you can send to that Google group. Are you?
I don't know if we're part of the Google group.
Yeah, we had.
So maybe Emily or you can send it along.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I can add you, and then except you're going to get a lot of emails. I'll
yeah. We'll just have Noelle send it on our behalf.
All right. Great.
Patricia.
Do you want to have some, because Nancy's going to be giving approval, some rules of thumb about when you want to formally get your project approved? Because you can do that. I mean, you don't want people like making up projects and then submitting them for approval, right? Or
yeah. So that's a good thing to go through. I'll just share with my sample project. So the suggestion is basically like, when you submit your project to Nancy, then it will be in her court. You can no longer edit it until she sends it back to you. So here I am searching for my pending project. When I'm done, I have to put edit pending project. And then when I'm done editing it, then I will submit it. So really you only want to submit it once you believe that it's completed. Once it is submitted, then it goes, I'm an administrator, so once I submit it, it actually gets approved on site. But when you submit it, basically, then an email goes to Nancy, and then Nancy can log in and look at the project, and at the bottom of every one of these pages will be a little square with comments. So she might say like, oh, your project description isn't clear, or you've forgotten to include this partner. Or, she can make comments like on your budget, like this doesn't seem like your full budget, or, what about this performance measure? So in each page, and if she doesn't find any errors, she'll just submit it, and then it will go up on the site, and you'll both get notifications. If she does have some requests for you to change it, you'll get an email saying, Nancy has reviewed your project. She has requested some changes. Click here to edit, and then you can see her comments. And then once you've addressed all of her comments, you would submit it again for her approval.
Brittany, will they have, as they go annually to update their projects? Does Nancy have to approve every time they make changes?
Yes. Well, Nancy or their project steward. Nancy said for now she would like that role. She may change her mind.
I might run away screaming later, or hire a coordinator to help.
But I think the idea is for right now, just to maintain consistency and the way she wants things reported for this particular grant, to have Nancy do the approval. And then, Nancy will have Tess and my support as well. We can walk her through the first few of those. And again, she may decide to knock that back to the individual RCDs to approve. But
Emily asked a good question about what to charge to, and pointed out something that I've been meaning to tell you is an error. Task 3 is where you would charge this to, and even though on the on the first contract it's not listed, it is, you can use it now. If you've got the first contract with me, you can. The only thing that can't be charged is task 2. And that was somebody else asked me and pointed out that stupid thing that I left off. So I can modify anybody's contract that they want, but I can also just tell you that the only thing you can't charge to without the second agreement is task 2. Everything else can be charged under the first agreement, including task 3, and project tracker would be on there.
Nancy, really quick, which is task 3? I thought this would go to admin. It wouldn't-
Well, task 3 is monitoring, maintenance, and reporting.
Okay,
So I think it fits under reporting really well. It could also be project management and grant administration, but to me, it's clear that it's task 3. So I think this is going to require yet another email from me clarifying that, and also just clarifying that someone noticed that I made the mistake of keeping 3 out. I think at some point I was thinking, oh, if you're not implementing, you're not going to monitor and maintain, but that was dumb. So I just need to put it in there.
thank you.
All right. Thank you all for your time today. I know as being part of one of these trainings on year end, it could be kind of boring. So we appreciate your time and all the good work you're doing in your communities.
And thanks so much to you and Tess and Emily for working on this. I can't tell you how grateful I am. Thank you very much. Okay, we're going to end right on time. 1 minute early, even better. Okay, thanks everyone.
Bye.
Bye.